Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space today. Okay, we've done Deep State, we've done Cambridge Analytica, we've done Kavanaugh, we've done rezoning in Harlem. Now, apples.
You've done your homework, Brian. You can have some fun now.
That's right. So take a deep breath, look around, and notice that the seasons have changed, and maybe it's time for a trip to the country for a nice day of apple picking. Saturday Night Live had a little fun with that idea when Adie Bryant and Kate McKinnon cracked each other up, spoofing orchard-owning sisters.
For just $45, you can bring home $10 worth of apples.
Select from our varieties like huge, soft,
Tiny hard,
green,
orange,
and apple.
But if you visited an orchard lately or your local farmer's market, you probably know the varieties are far more exciting and the names more enticing. McIntosh, Brayburn, Cortland, Cameo, and now from Washington State, add Cosmic Crunch to the barrel. It sounds like a Ben & Jerry's flavor, right? How and why do you make a new apple? And where do those names come from? To explain it all, we are joined by none other than Dan Pashman, the host of the podcast The Sporkful, which he always reminds us is for eaters, not foodies. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, do you have a favorite apple?
Well, how much time you got, Brian? I think it depends on the situation. You know, there's sometimes you want a really big, sweet, crunchy, juicy apple. Sometimes you want something a little smaller. Sometimes you want something a little bit tart, like a McIntosh, though the skin's a little too thick. If I'm going big and sweet and crunchy, maybe Honey Crisp. Maybe there's one called Sweet Tango. Full disclosure, they've advertised on my podcast in the past, but I do really like those apples.
And you've had a fraught relationship with apples in some way.
That's true, yeah. It's been up and down for us over the years. I have a lot of like seasonal pollen allergies, and in my 20s I developed an allergy to apples that I understand is related to that, sort of the pollen that pollinated the apple flower, and you put it in your mouth, and I would get like a itchy roof of mouth, a lot of sneezing. It would go away after half an hour, but it was enough to make me not eat many apples, and I seem to have outgrown that. So now we're back.
And I know from the podcast that you hate Red Delicious apples. A lot of people will say, oh, Red Delicious, that's like the cheesy apple. Why is it so ubiquitous if it's not appreciated?
I mean, does anyone like Red Delicious at this point? Come on. I mean, that's just, look, everyone can like what they like, but I think that speaks to the power of marketing. Look, Red Delicious was created a long time ago when there weren't that many apples to compete with, and it was created really with two goals in mind. One, to look very pretty and red, and to look delicious, and also to be very durable. Because in Washington State, you know, all the apples get harvested in the fall right now, but they're sold all year round. And so they have to last. They go into these huge refrigerated warehouses. And so the apple you eat from Washington State in June was harvested many months before. And so Red Delicious checked those two boxes. They look great and they last forever. Now their skin is, you know, like sandpaper, but that wasn't the priority decades ago when they were created.
So listeners and green space audience, do you have a favorite variety of apple? I wonder if any apple growers are listening on the fringes of our radio signal. Call in with what you look for in an apple as a crop, or apple eaters, if you could develop a new apple, what would you want? Or anything you've always wanted to know about an apple but never had anyone to ask. You now have Dan Pashman, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. By the way, my producer counted 75 varieties of apples on the Columbia County Semascot Orchards website. Where did they all come from?
All over the place. Some of them have been around for a very long time, and some of them are new. And there's been an explosion of apple varieties created in the last couple of decades. Basically, what happened was, you know, for years it was the red one, the green one, the yellow one, Golden Delicious, right? Those were the three, and supermarkets didn't need any more. And growers didn't want to experiment with new kinds of apples because you got to plant an apple tree. It takes years for that apple tree to grow and to bring that fruit to market, and you have no guarantee that anyone's going to want to buy this new apple that you've invested in. So enter this new sort of economic development called apple clubs. These are sort of like collectives. They operate almost like franchises. So an apple gets developed and it is owned like intellectual property. And only a limited number of licenses are sold to a limited number of growers. So this controls supply. And there's a license fee that's charged. And then these collectives, the apple clubs, band together to market the new varieties of apples. And so they can sort of go to the growers and say, look, the market's not going to be flooded. So even though there's not huge demand, you're going to be one of few who has this apple. On top of that, there's going to be a big marketing push behind this apple. And so I promise you people will buy it if you grow it. And that has really changed things. The other thing that changed things was Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp came into the picture, and suddenly people are paying 2 and 3 and 4 times as much for apples because the apple was so good. And that made that set a light bulb off in a lot of people's heads, and they thought we could be making a lot more money off of apples.
So apple breeding and Saturday Night Live wasn't actually that far off, right? Soft versus crisp, sweet versus tart, red versus yellow.
Those are all the factors. When you set out to create a new apple, you first have to think about, like, what's the target? What's the goal here? What do people want in an apple, right? So there's texture, there's juiciness, there's sweetness versus in relation to tartness, there's crunch, and that's, it's the thickness of the skin and also how that plays with the texture and firmness of the interior. Because those two things, you may not have thought of this before, but the next time you bite into an apple, you will. As your teeth pierce the skin and get into the flesh of the apple, it is that pairing between the snap of the skin and the density of the interior that together form the textural experience. You can tell I've thought about this a lot, Brian.
Yeah, a lot, really a lot. Some people think about the Constitution, and you think about...
Right. Well, it's thanks to those people that I have the freedom to talk about apples.
Touche. On line 6, Michelle in Somers, New York. You're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I have a question about apples for apple pie. I just recently saw a recipe that said you should use different types of apples and not stick with one type of apple for your pie. And I thought that they cook at different rates, and some might be crunchy and some would be soft, and I'm just wondering how that works.
I can't say for sure, but that would make me nervous like you. I feel like I'm sort of obsessive in the kitchen, and I would have the same concerns. I feel like, look, there's a lot of good apple pie recipes out there. I would say find the one that works for you. The idea that there's one rule of one kind of apple of all the many out there that is the right kind or the right combination for apple pie, I would say, to me, the biggest thing is just like you don't want an apple that's too sweet. You want some tart in there. You want a balance of flavors. If you get that, you'll be doing okay.
We have a question here in the green space, right in the front row. Hi there.
Hi. Full disclosure, I love Macintosh apples, so I'd love to know what the history is, but also, when one buys applesauce in the supermarket, what kind of apples am I eating?
Those are two good questions, and I don't have a great answer for you. Macintosh has been around for a long time, so it's safe to say that it came to be before the boom of the apple clubs. Apples were originally grown all over America to make cider. They weren't for eating. Johnny Appleseed planted apple trees all over the place so that when people moved to new areas of the country, they'd be able to have something to drink because they couldn't be sure the water would be safe to drink. Then the Prohibition came, and they needed to rebrand apples, and that's where we get the saying, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away." That was a marketing slogan that was made to get people to eat apples, because before that they were only used for cider. I forget the second question, but that seemed like a good answer. So I'm gonna. Applesauce. I think that depends on the applesauce, and also how much the applesauce, how much they want to be able to charge for the applesauce.
Let's go to Carrie on line 2 in Greenwich Village. Hi, Carrie. You're on WNYC with Dan Pashman.
Hi. Great to talk to an apple expert. I only get apples from the farmer's market, so just at this time of year, basically, and I really love the newish breed of snapdragons. Mr. Pashman, have you had those?
I don't know that I've had the Snapdragon, but I love the name. And when we did a recent episode, when we did this on the Sporkful podcast recently, we had a whole section of the episode was devoted to apple naming, which is now in itself a big business. And the names are so elaborate and wonderful, and that name is so evocative to me, because you hear the word crisp in a lot of apples. We have the new one, the Cosmic Crisp. There's the Honey Crisp. But I like Snap because to me that actually kind of better describes the experience of piercing the skin of the apple, which clearly I'm kind of obsessed with, Brian.
Clearly.
And so that's why I really love that. I love the name. I'm already sold on it.
Your psychologist was just telling me that your obsession with piercing the skin is no.
Let me tell you about my mother, Brian.
But this Cosmic Crisp apple was developed at Washington State University, and I've read that the university is kind of borrowing a page from the clubs that developed other copyrighted apples like Zestar! Exclamation point, or Ruby Frost, or Snapdragon.
Right. No, that's exactly right. So basically, the growers in Washington State, there's been this big revolution in apples. These apple clubs came into the picture. Honey Crisp changes everything. And the growers in Washington State are still stuck growing Red Delicious. Wah, wah. It's falling out of favor. They can't sell it. So they're getting nervous. So Washington State says, we're going to get our own, Washington State University, I should say, says we're going to get our own breeding program. And they spent 20 years and millions of dollars to develop the Cosmic Crisp. And they said, we're going to play this club game too. We're going to own the apple, and we're only going to license it to growers in Washington State. And growers in Washington State went bananas for it. 12 million trees have been planted, all in preparation for the launch this fall. It'll be in limited availability starting this fall, winter, then bigger next year. But the growers, so the growers in Washington State planted a lot of Cosmic Crisp. And so they're wagering big time, but because there's so many apples coming, there's also a huge marketing push coming. And if all goes as planned, Washington State University will stand to make about $100 million off of this.
Wow. But, kind of the opposite of the caller who was just talking about only getting apples from the farmer's market and therefore only this kind of year. Farmer's market varieties, are also things like Ashmead's Kernel and Pink Delight, but this Cosmic Crisp is designed as a supermarket apple, right?
This is going to be a mass market apple. Washington State, by the definition of farmers markets, what is it, 100 miles, 150-mile radius from the market, it has to be grown. That's like a rule, at least in New York. And so, obviously, no apples from Washington State could be at farmers markets in New York. And look, farmers market apples are great, and I love, certainly supporting local businesses is important, so I'm all for that. And I've heard Ashmead's Kernel is a great apple, although I haven't tried it. But there are also good apples at the supermarket, and I don't think we should throw the new Crisps bath out with the Red Delicious bathwater.
So, speaking of the Red Delicious bathwater, we like to take pushback on this show for the sake of conversation and diverse points of view. We do it in all our politics segments. So let's go to Lillian on line 10 from Edison, New Jersey, because why not do it about apples?
All right.
Right, Lillian?
It's Crossfire Apples.
Hello.
Hi, Lillian. You're on the air.
Can you hear me? Because I hardly hear you.
We can
but
hear you.
Let me defend my apple.
Do it.
I love my Red Delicious. It's crisp, it's tasty, it's sweet, it's nice. It's everything I want from an apple that you eat out of hand. And when I make a pie, I use Cortland's or Rome Beauties. But the Red Delicious is my favorite for just taking a bite in. And what I think is happening is that people are buying the names rather than the apples. You see an apple that says Gaily. You see an apple that says something crisp. And they're buying that, thinking they're getting something special. And those are ordinary apples as far as I'm concerned. The Red Delicious has a really firm, good flavor.
So there, Dan Pashman.
Look, first of all, everyone's entitled to like what they like. I'm not going to say that she's wrong for liking Red Delicious. I hope she has many wonderful years of eating Red Delicious ahead. I will say that if you're going to take issue with the name, it has the word delicious in the name. So, they're obviously trying to, that was marketing too, and they're trying to tell us something too. And, I'll politely point out that sales of Red Delicious have been declining for some time. So I'm obviously not the only one who thinks that. But hey, look, to each his own. There's enough apples for everyone.
One more. Nate on line 3 on the Lower East Side. Nate, you're on WNYC. Hi.
How you doing? First time, long time. You're a great
thank you.
Reporter.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me okay. You're starting to fade on me. But I had a question about it's either a pear apple or an Asian apple, and the origins of it and where it came from. I like it. Sometimes you need to eat it with a napkin because it's so juicy.
You said right. The what I grew up calling the Asian pear. Those are incredibly juicy. I don't think that it falls under the strict definition of an apple. It's probably more of a hybrid. And yeah, I mean, I'm all for those. I do feel like those are hard to bite into whole. I think they need to be cut up. They're a little too firm. Am I right? Yeah. So that, to me, that's a different eating experience, but also very wonderful.
You know what? That was so efficient. We're going to sneak in one more. Margaret on line 9 in Manhattan about an apple that has disappeared. Hi, Margaret, real quick.
Hi there. I used to buy apples called Miltons, Milton, which I cannot find anywhere anymore. I don't think I've seen one in over 10 years.
Huh.
Online, I found that they're still being sold in Maine. Do you know what's happened to them?
I don't know for sure. I'm not familiar with the Milton in particular, but I would suspect it's, these are trends like anything else. Apples come and go. They go into favor, fall out of favor. We did play a game on this episode of the Sporkful podcast called Apple Variety or New England Town. And had Milton been one of the contestants in that game, the correct answer would have been both.
Before we let you go, I have to ask about another recent episode of the Sporkful about sexist sandwiches. What?
Well, I don't know that the sandwiches themselves are sexist, Brian. We set out to ask this question. It was prompted by the great New York food critic, Mimi Sheridan. She told me a story that she had been driving around years ago with 104 pastrami sandwiches in her car to weigh them all to see which New York deli gives you the best value for your money. So I had a caller call into the Sporkful and says, I'll bet they make smaller sandwiches for women. So a woman who's a food writer and reporter, a friend of mine, and I set out around New York buying a bunch of sandwiches and then brought them back to weigh them to determine whether or not it's true.
And?
Well, the numbers did not show sandwich sexism, but we did find anecdotal evidence. More than one sandwich maker we spoke to acknowledged that one male and one female sandwich maker said they do think that there's a disparity.
Dan Pashman will be hosting a live taping of the Sporkful podcast here in New York on Monday, November 18th. That's at Trunk Club at the Palace Hotel in Midtown. His guest will be Chef Angie Marr of the Beatrice Inn. Ticket info is at sporkful.com/live. And please thank Dan Pashman, host of the Sporkful, which is for eaters, not foodies.
Thanks,
and
Brian.
audience, thank you all so much for coming to the Green Space today.